بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله وسلم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا زدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. اللهم أصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، وأصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، وأصلح لنا آخرتنا التي إليها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل. You got rid of my Quran reciters, man. I'm just joking. It's okay. So inshallah, we'll embark on this journey now, where we're going to learn tafsir together. I prefer to say it like that as opposed to me teaching tafsir, because I honestly really don't feel that I'm worthy of teaching it. But hopefully, inshallah, we can learn a little bit, inshallah, together. Subhanallah, I mean, the difficulty that we're going to face here is we have about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and if we're stretching it, maybe 2 hours, and this Quran is an ocean. So the question will always be, when is it too much? So please bear with me if I'm going too much, and we're going into too much detail and making it boring. I don't want it to be boring, but at the same time, I want to make sure everybody's getting as much detail as possible. The other difficulty with this is that I'm gonna have to be translating, and the Quran, obviously, بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ. It is with the clear Arabic tongue, and the Arabic tongue, subhanallah, there's a lot of majesticness in the Arabic of the Quran, right? And that's going to be a challenge to show you that that greatness of Arabic, of it being the Quran. Like, there's a reason when Quraysh used to hear the Quran, they would be in awe, right? There's a reason that when the Prophet ﷺ read Surah Al-Najm in front of the Kaaba, everybody, kuffar, non-kuffar, they fell down and they made sajda. Because the Quran is it's unbelievably mesmerizing. So unfortunately, that's going to be an aspect that we're not going to get that full part of it, the Arabic part of it. And just before Salah, I was talking about the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, right? I mean, you could say, أَفَلَا يَفْهَمُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, other than the Quran, obviously. أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. But no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used this specific word. Do they not يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ? And tadabbur comes from the word dubur, which means behind you, like in the back of something, in the rear of something, right? So he says, do they not do tadabbur of the Quran? Meaning, do they not go behind the surface meaning of the Quran to fully understand the Quran, to fully appreciate the Quran, right? Because when you go behind the surface meaning of the Quran, that's when you see Allah's majesty and His greatness in it, subhanallah. Because it's Allah who's talking. It's not, just your most eloquent professor talking. No. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who created the heavens and the earth, the one who created language, and so on and so forth. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks, it's incredible, that within itself. So inshallah, I'll try to bring that meaning, inshallah, so that we can understand that part of it as well. Now, before we get into the Quran, one other aspect that I was talking about was how we're embarking on this journey of understanding the Quran. And this is the part where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. But then there's the other aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala where He says, وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ يَا رَبِّ إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَهْجُورًا. Right? Where the Prophet, he's going to say to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment, that my people, they left this Quran. They left the Quran. Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes these people, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا مِّنَ الْمُجْرِمِينَ. Like He says, and that's how we have made for every prophet enemies from the criminals. So Allah called these people criminals. And who are these people who left the Quran? They don't read it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called these people who don't read it criminals and enemies of the Prophet ﷺ. So pondering over the Quran is one step into the whole reason the Quran was sent, which is for us to act on it, which is for us to take it with its meaning, with all of its substance, so on and so forth, right? And then reading the Quran is also to take another aspect of the Quran, is to have that tabarruk bil Quran, like extracting that barakah from the Quran into your life. Just by reading the Quran, you're getting that barakah in your life. Understanding it or not understanding it, you're bringing that barakah into your life. So I want to revive with that aspect as well, because we're doing something that's amazing with tafsir. But we don't want to neglect the other side of the Quran, which is to read it, just to read it, whether we understand it or not. So I think everybody should have a daily dose of the Quran, of reading the Quran. Whether that dose be 1 page, or that dose be 2 pages, or that dose be 20 pages, right? Whatever that is that you can do, and whatever dose that you designate for yourself, that you keep this dose for the rest of your life, right? And the reason that this is important is the hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhu, where he narrated that the Prophet ﷺ heard that he was fasting every day. He was doing a few other things. He was reading the entire Quran in a day. He was fasting every day. He was praying the entire night. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ heard about this. So that in regards to the fasting aspect, the Prophet ﷺ, he told him, maybe you should fast 3 times every month. Right? He said, maybe you should fast 3 times every month. So he said, that's too little. So the Prophet ﷺ said, maybe you should fast twice a week. He said, that's too little. Little, Ya Rasulullah. He said, okay, then maybe you should fast every other day. He said, that's too little. And the Prophet ﷺ said, that's the maximum. Like, you can't fast more than that. Now what's interesting to me in this hadith is what he says next. He says, I wish I listened to the advice of the Prophet ﷺ, because now that I'm older, it's extremely difficult to fast every other day. Why is it interesting to me that he said that? Because wouldn't logic tell you to say, oh, I understand why the Prophet ﷺ said, don't fast every day. Now let me start fasting twice a week. Or let me start fasting 3 times every month, because now I understand it. No, he didn't say that. He said, I wish I listened to him back then, because it's so important to stay consistent until you die. It's so important to stay consistent until you die that he did not want to renege on his commitment that he made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what I'm saying is this commitment that you guys are making today to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in reading Quran, I hope, inshallah, you guys keep this commitment for the rest of your lives, inshallah. Whatever that commitment might be. Okay? So, in that commitment, there's another aspect to this. So there's just reading the Quran. But then there's reading it correctly. Reading it exactly the way the Prophet ﷺ read it. This is a lifetime task as well. And the proof of that it's a lifetime task, is Ali radiallahu anhu. He said the Prophet ﷺ, he used to teach us Quran all the time. All day, every day. He would be teaching us Quran unless he was junub. Meaning that they were constantly learning how to recite correctly. They were constantly learning. They were memorizing. They were doing this, so on and so forth. So they were constantly increasing in their Quran. Does that make sense? It was a constant increase. So therefore, this is something that we have to implement in our lives, that we are constantly connecting to the Quran, whether that be by reading. And memorizing is, in essence, reading. Doesn't that make sense? Because on the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to tell you, irqa wa rattil, like go up in levels, and recite, just like how you used to recite in this dunya, because your place in Jannah is at the last ayah that you recite. So the more you read in this world, the higher you go in Jannah. So I mean, memorizing is reading more. Is in essence reading more. Right? So the more you read, the more you're memorizing, the more you're getting closer to the Quran in general. Okay? So there's the reading aspect. There is reading it correctly. Learning the tajweed. Spending time with that. But understand that these are different efforts. Right? You don't necessarily put them together. They're different efforts. Then there is understanding the Quran, and then there is acting upon the Quran, and then there is sacrificing for the Quran. Okay? Sacrificing for the Quran, the scholars, they would, how they would sacrifice, either by learning it, right? That's a sacrifice, or by praying at night with it, where you're sacrificing your sleep for the Quran. Okay? And why is it important to sacrifice? Because you don't get it until you sacrifice for it. Right? Like the Prophet ﷺ, the way he got the Quran was by difficulty. It was difficult. It was hard for the Prophet ﷺ to receive the Quran, and that was his sacrifice in getting the Quran. So in order for us to get the Quran, we have to sacrifice for it. It's not going to come while you're sleeping in your bed, or you're chilling, with your friends, or drinking at a coffee shop or whatever. It's going to come with sacrifice. It's going to come with sacrifice. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us to be from amongst the people of the Quran. So I don't have necessarily a plan to implement in regards to reading the Quran, but we can talk about, once the schedule is a little stable, inshallah, about doing a tajweed class, inshallah, because tajweed is important to work on that little by little, inshallah. So let's talk about the history of the Quran a little bit. As we know, the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He revealed it to the seventh heaven on Laylatul Qadr. There's a difference of opinion between the scholars what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means when He said, Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatul Qadr, that we revealed it on Laylatul Qadr. Revealed the Quran on Laylatul Qadr, right? Some scholars say that means, it came down in different stages in Laylatul Qadr. It began coming down on Laylatul Qadr, so on and so forth. But Allah knows best. The the best opinion is that it came down to the seventh heaven, to our heavens, on Laylatul Qadr, and then Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam brought it to the Prophet ﷺ little by little, piece by piece. Right? Or other angels as well. Okay? So, and now when the Quran came to the Prophet ﷺ, he was constantly being taught by Jibreel how to read, what comes where the ayah begins and where the ayah stops. All of this was taught to the Prophet ﷺ. Where the ayahs begin, where the surahs start, where the surahs end. Each ayah, where it begins, where it stops. Each ayah in the Quran is taught very specifically, very precisely, exactly like that. Okay? And as the Prophet ﷺ said, that the Quran was revealed to me on 7 letters. It was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ on 7 letters. Okay? 7 letters, the scholars have a long difference of opinion on exactly what that means. But Allah knows best. There was Sheikh Muhammad Amin al-Shanqiti, may Allah have mercy on him. He died in the 70s. He was an incredible. And his basic conclusion was that the Prophet ﷺ, when he taught the Quran, he taught it a very specific way to different companions. Because there was a hadith where Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he heard someone else reading the Quran. And he got mad because that's not how he learned it. So he was like, why are you messing the Quran up? He said, that's how I learned it from the Prophet ﷺ. He said, let's go to the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes to the Prophet ﷺ. He says, Ya Rasulullah, this guy is messing the Quran up. So the Prophet ﷺ, he asked him, he said, read it. So he read it. He said, هَكَذَا أُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِ. This is how it was revealed to me. So then he told Umar, read it. So he read it. And he said, this is how it was revealed to me. Right? So this shows you that there were different ways to recite the Quran. Right? Now, how did we get these different ways to recite the Quran? We got them the exact way we got hadith. Okay? Now, let's take a step back here. Because Quran and hadith, they were preserved they were preserved written, and they were also preserved orally. Okay? But the Quran was preserved more than hadith. The Quran was preserved more than hadith. When I say preserved more than hadith, because the Prophet ﷺ put more emphasis on the Quran, where he would tell the companions to not write hadith, but he would tell them to write Quran. Right? And the Prophet ﷺ was constantly teaching Quran. As I just mentioned in that hadith, where Ali radiallahu anhu, he said that the Prophet ﷺ was always teaching us Quran unless he was junub. Meaning they were always learning Quran all day, every day. It was constant. Right? So the Quran was their life. It was everything about their lives. They were constantly learning it. Where does the ayah start? Where does the ayah begin? How do you pronounce this? How do you recite that? Everything precisely was taught very specifically. Right? Now when the Prophet ﷺ taught, again, just by shown in that previous hadith that I just mentioned, he taught some people this way and some people that way. Okay? But nonetheless, the most knowledgeable of the companions in reciting the Quran was Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu. Ubay ibn Ka'b was the most knowledgeable. So you'll find that a lot of the chains of narrations of the Quran, when it comes to the recitation of it, they go back to Ubay ibn Ka'b. A lot of them. Okay? So, now, let me, I guess, I don't know if the people online are going to be able to see this right now. So you have the Prophet ﷺ, right? He would teach many companions the Quran, right? So let's put some names to that. Say, for example, Ubay, and another example is Ibn Abbas. Another example is Ibn Mas'ud. Okay. So then, when they would teach these, these are just examples. Okay, so when the Prophet ﷺ would teach, the one who had the most knowledge, who had basically what it seems to be the case, was Ubay ibn Ka'b, the modes of recitation. Okay? But other companions knew them as well. Does that make sense? Yes. So then, when the Prophet ﷺ was teaching, as you can see here, Umar didn't know all of them. So let's say Ibn Abbas, maybe he learned 3, for example. Ibn Mas'ud, maybe he learned 2. I'm making these numbers up. They're not real numbers. And Ubay ibn Ka'b, all 7. The different letters. Radiallahu anhum jami'an. Right? So now when they're teaching it how they learned it from the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ, when he taught it, how did he teach it? He taught this guy 7, this guy 3, that guy 2, for example. Right? Again, I'm making these numbers up. They're not, right? So now when they taught it, they did the same thing the Prophet ﷺ taught. He taught this guy 2 of them, this guy 3 of them, that guy 1 of them, right? Depending on what he saw was the best way to teach it, right? So now you have another chain, and then another person, another chain, another person, right? And this is the exact same way hadith was transmitted, by the way. Exact same way. Okay? So, I mean, obviously this has multiple streams here, right? Does that make sense? So now, when all of this was transmitted like that, and all I'm talking about now is orally. I'm only talking about orally. So when all of this is transmitted, right? This person has a certain amount of modes of recitation. This person has another amount of modes of recitation. But when this person reads it, he's going to say, I read it exactly the way Ubay ibn Ka'b taught me. When this person reads it, he's going to say, I read it exactly the way Ibn Abbas taught me. When this person reads it, he's going to say, I read it exactly the way Ibn Mas'ud taught me. And then they are going to say they learned it exactly the way the Prophet ﷺ taught them. Right? So on and so forth. Well, what happened was 3rd century, Imam al-Shatibi, rahmatullahi alayh, there were other people who tried to gather all the modes of recitation. But Imam al-Shatibi was basically the one who everybody depends on today in gathering the modes of recitation. He gathered all of these people, all of these, this line right here, and then he called the modes of recitation based on those sheikhs' names. Right? Based on those mashaykhs' names. For example, Abu Ja'far al-Madani, right? Abu Ja'far radiallahu anhu, or rahmatullahi alayh, he learned from Abdullah ibn Abbas, if I'm remembering correctly. Or was it Ubay ibn Ka'b? Anyways, he learned from either Ubay ibn Ka'b or Abdullah ibn Abbas, I'm not sure. And Abu Ja'far rahmatullahi alayhi was a tabi'i. Right? So his mode of recitation, most people, it's not very common, but his mode of recitation, he read it exactly the way his sheikh taught it to him. Does that make sense? So then therefore, now there are 10 modes of recitation. 10 modes of recitation, and then each mode of recitation has different riwayat. Okay? And again, like it can get confusing, but the point is that each one of them is saying, I learned it from this sheikh. I learned it from this person, who learned it from this person, who learned it from... Like, from a bird's eye view, you'd be like, wow, this is confusion. Right? But the Quran is perfect. Like, think about it for a second. Like, the book that we have, the Quran, is all the same. There's some minor differences between the different qira'at, but it's pretty much the same. So the different modes of recitation, there can be a difference in slight meaning, where that difference in meaning can give you more tafsir. Like, it can help you understand the situation better. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنْ جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَأٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Right? Or you will believe if a fasiq comes to you with news, right? Verify. But then there's another mode of recitation, فَتَثَبَّتُوا, meaning be firm. Like, don't let it shake you.
It's
two different meanings, but it has the full tafsir of the situation. Now you see the situation is not only do you need to verify, but you need to not let it shake you. For example, like, let's say somebody comes to you and he says, oh, so-and-so said this about you. Don't let it shake you. Don't let it harm you. Don't let it change. Like, and it could be even worse if, it could start a war. Somebody said this and it could start a war between two countries. But don't let it shake you. So also go ahead and verify. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So it's adding tafsir. So the different modes of recitation sometimes can give you tafsir. The different modes of recitation sometimes they can give you the different tongues of the Arabs. Right? For example, Syrians, people from Syria and Lebanon, when there's a ta' marbuta, they make it a.
Yeah.
Right? Like they say maqluba, right? Maqluba with a ta' at the end. They say ma'lube.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's actually a mode of recitation in the qira'ah for Kisa'i, rahmatullahi alayh. So in the qira'ah of Kisa'i, وَيْلٌ لِكُلِّ هُمَزَةٍ لُمَزَةٍ الَّذِي جَمَعَ مَالًا وَعَدَّدَهُ يَحْسَبُ أَنَّ مَالَهُ أَخْلَدَهُ كَلَّا لَيُنبَذَنَّ فِي الْحُطَمِ. Right? The other two were has, not ta' marbutas, by the way. That's why. So for the ta' marbuta, I mean that's a different language, different Arab language. Right? Another Arab language, and this was the Medina Arab language, where they would do, when there's a meme with a meme al-jama'a, for example, غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. This was the Medina language. Yeah.
So I thought it was Maliki, or worse,
Well, okay, so Imam Nafi' was from Medina. Okay, so Imam Nafi', he had Qalun and Warsh.
Okay.
One way to recite Qalun is like that.
Okay.
But Imam Ja'far as well, he was also from Medina. And both of his ways to recite, both of his students say alayhimu waladdallin. Right? Also Ibn Kathir, this was also a Mecca way of reciting. Ibn Kathir was from Mecca, rahmatullahi alayh. And his two students who narrated from him, Qalun and Bazzi, they also say غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمُ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Right? So the point is that there's the different modes of recitation sometimes give you additional meaning. And sometimes it's only the different language in Arabic. Does that make sense? But nonetheless, they all have their chains of narration just like a hadith. So it's Quran. Right? So now, let me ask the question again. It kind of seems like chaos. Well, if it was chaos, then there would be differences. But there's no difference. Like, they're the same. It's either the difference in a language or the difference in tafsir. Does that make sense? There's no significant difference between them. I mean, think about it.
But the tafsir remains the same though, even like فَتَبَيَّنُوا
فَتَثَبَّتُوا.
I mean, if you look at the whole text,
Yeah,
that didn't change.
one explain another. When you try to explain what it means, for example,
It's not necessarily explaining explanation to the situation. Sometimes it can explain the other.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the actual text is different then, or?
Yes. Okay. So I'm getting to that.
Yeah.
I'm getting to that point. So now, all I talked about was the oral tradition. Simultaneously with that is the written tradition. So what happened is when the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the companions, he also was telling them, write this. There were different companions who were writing the Quran. Ubay ibn Ka'b was one of them. Uthman ibn Affan, radiyallahu anhum. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Abdullah ibn Abbas. Everybody had portions of the Quran. Some of them overlapped, some didn't. Does that make sense? So they were also writing down the Quran, and the Prophet ﷺ would tell them, write it like this, write it like that, even though he didn't know how to read or write. Subhanallah. So, because it was exactly what Jibreel was telling him, so he would do exactly what Jibreel ﷺ would tell him to do. So therefore, they were writing the Quran down like that until the Prophet ﷺ died. When the Prophet ﷺ died, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, who was the first Khalifa, he said, we need to start bringing the Quran into one book. Okay? So he got companions, a few companions together to start doing this, and the head of the committee to bring the Quran into one book was Uthman radiallahu anhu. Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. So they worked diligently to put the Quran into one book. Now, all of the companions were in on this. Not all of them, but the major companions from the Quran or of the Quran were in on this. They were all putting this together. Does that make sense? So the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu passed, he died about 2 years later. Then Umar radiallahu anhu died, and then the books were finally written during the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu. Notice I said books. Okay? So when Uthman radiallahu anhu wrote the books, he kept one in Medina. He sent one to Mecca, he sent one to Kufa, one to Basra, and one to Sham. And I'm saying it like that because obviously they were different regions than they are now. Okay? So there were slight differences between the books.
I was gonna say, were they the same or were they different?
Aha, there were slight differences. And there were slight differences out of respect for the different modes of recitation. So you would find in this one book, it was slightly towards the Nafi'i way of reading. And then in this other book is slightly towards the Ibn Kathir way of reading. This one is towards the way Hisham was reading, or the way Ibn Amir was reading. Right? So on and so forth. Okay? So the different modes of recitation were captured in the books. Like, I'll give you one example of that. You mind, Lanian, getting me like a napkin or something to...
I got it.
So you know how in English we say Abraham, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys know that's actually in the Quran as well?
Abraham?
Yeah.
Really?
Ibrahim.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Without the
Yes. So you'll find in Surah Al-Baqarah,
I don't know, it's white.
it's a white.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should
yeah.
work, right?
Well, hold on.
Maybe
now.
dry.
You got something.
Maybe dry.
I'll use it
helps. Yeah.
if I need it.
Right.
Good job, man.
Man, I'm trying to be good, but
So you'll find in Surah Al-Baqarah that Ibrahim is written like this. And the rest of the Quran, Ibrahim is written like this. Ibrahim is written like this in Surah Al-Baqarah, and then it's written like this in the rest of the Quran. Why? Because Qira'at Hisham, they read this as Ibrahim. Qira'at Hisham, which is Qira'at Ibn Amir, or excuse me, Riwayat Hisham an Ibn Amir. They read this as Ibrahim. For example, إن إبراهام كان أمة قانتا. Right? So the writing of the Quran was paying homage to the different ways of reading. Does that make sense?
Yeah, by the way, this name that you just said, use that name.
Yeah, that's how we say it in America. Right?
Musa too. Not Ibrahim. In this country, you say Abraham, right?
Abraham.
Abraham.
Yeah.
But the Ibrahim, we
But
say,
yeah, it's just a kasra here,
Abraham.
Ibrahim.
yeah, so they see Musa, just like that.
Musa?
Musa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these are non-Arabic names,
Correct.
so they would be pronounced
Local.
different necessarily. Than
It's an Arabic joke, the Arabic class joke.
Oh. Right? So the point that I'm trying to make here is that when they wrote the Quran, first of all, because the different ways to write it, because there were different ways to write it. Why were there different ways to write it? Because the Prophet ﷺ would tell this guy, this companion, write it like this, and he would tell another companion, write it like this, which is different. Does that make sense? So therefore, when they made the different masahif, they made them in the different ways. The Prophet ﷺ told them to write it. Right? The Prophet ﷺ would tell this companion, the ayah ends here. And he would tell this other companion, no, the ayah ends here. Does that make sense? Why? That's all to give us the different ways of the Quran. And it's all to tell us in the end of the day. Now when we have this Quran, there is no way in the world, that is impossible, that this Quran was collected like this, except that it's from Allah. There's no way. Like the precision that's in this Quran, it's impossible for it to be humans got together and then they made this, let alone something that has 10 modes of recitation. Now when I say 10, it's really 20, and when I say 20, it's really 900. 960 awjuh. Explain to you what it was from the Prophet ﷺ.
Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to explain to you how we look at it. Because it's different when you're looking top down and up to the top.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
Because now we look at it like this, because there are 10 qira'at. So I'm going to write down a couple of them, right? So there's Nafi', right? Ibn Kathir, right? And then there's Abu Amr, Abaj has Huti Kalam, and then there's Ibn Amir, Amir, Abaj has Huti Kalam Nasr, Asim.
yeah, you got to tell us that too.
Yeah, what is that? Is that
Farm boys.
the letters?
No, you don't.
This is how we
When you guys memorize the Quran, and then then we'll have another class on that one.
way of memorization.
Okay, but that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's 5 more, right? Each of these has 2. Okay, so Nafi' has Qalun, and then Warsh.
Is this called the riwayah, the one from the
Yes. So this is qira'ah.
Oh, okay.
This is qira'ah. So this person is called a qari. And this person is called a rawi. Okay, and Ibn Kathir had Bazzi and Qunbul. Abu Amr had Duri and Susi. And Ibn Amir has Ibn Dhakwan. Ibn Dhakwan and Hisham. And then Asim. The reason I went up to Asim so you guys can see Hafs. Asim has Shu'ba and Hafs.
Hassan.
Yes. And then has Hafs.
That makes sense.
So we read Hafs. Most of us, we read Hafs. This is Jafs. It's Hafs.
If
Right.
you read Ibrahim in a Pakistani masjid in Pakistan, you would not come out.
Right, yeah. You know. Well, that's why it's. I mean, and this is a long discussion between scholars about what is okay to read, how do you read it, so on and so forth. But anyways, the point that I'm making here is that Qalun. Okay, understand. There is the way that Imam Shatibi narrated it. Let me, I guess, see how I can organize my thoughts here. So you have okay, let me say it like this. Each of these guys has this going on. Remember what we talked about before? Each of them has this. Right? Some of these guys who I'm making lines of have multiple narrations as well. Right? These guys down here. Rahmatullahi alayhim jami'an. They have multiple narrations as well. Okay? So, Imam Shatibi, rahmatullahi alayh, is, I believe, so there's these guys, this level, we're going to make a box for that level. Imam Shatibi is here. This person is the one who extensively wrote about these different narrations. Okay? So you have all of these levels above him. Right? So he's learning from these different guys, and sometimes it might be a guy here, right, who learned all of these from all these guys. Right? So on and so forth, right? But nonetheless, what happened is that you have different narrations of Qanun. It's not just one. Like, from the way of Shatibi, there's 6 ways to read Qanun. From the way of Shatibi, there's 6 ways to read Wash.
How do you get this divergence? Like, I mean,
So the 6 ways, understand the difference between them
yeah.
are small differences. For example,
How do they originate? Like, how does?
what we talked about where they originate.
No, I mean, how, like the person that's learning Qalun from Nafi, right? And then all those 5 branches, how are they? Who gave them the authority to change?
They didn't change anything.
Okay.
They're saying it exactly how they learned it.
Oh, okay.
Learned it multiple ways.
They learned it multiple ways.
Okay.
Like, is it like a mixture of different, like from different?
No, they learned exactly how they learned it. There's no mixture. There's no reason to mix because it's the Prophet ﷺ told this companion, read it like this, and that's what he taught his. All these guys, they taught it exactly how they learned it. Right? And there were different ways to read it. So I'll give you an example of that. Right? So when I read to my sheikh, Wash. Okay? Wash is a little long, so bear with me for a second here. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الذين كفروا سواء عليهم أنذرتهم. There's two different ways to read أنذرتهم in wash. أنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون.
So how'd you get those two different ways in wash?
Because that's exactly what my teacher taught me. And his teacher taught him exactly that. And then it's
Okay.
all the way up.
I see.
But Warsh is the one who taught all of these.
Oh,
It was Warsh who taught all those ways.
okay.
And he learned those from Nafi.
I see.
But Qalun taught different ways that he learned also from Nafi.
Okay.
There's some similarities.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So it seems like it's chaos. But this shows you how amazing the Quran is. Because it's so perfect with all of this. Subhanallah. Like it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the reason why that it's so perfect, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He promised to protect this Quran and the Sunnah. And He protected it with these people. Right? And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from these people that also protect the Quran. Because like anytime we recite Hafs, he's getting blessings. Asim is getting blessings. And this guy, by the way, Shu'bah, by the way, this is one of the biggest hadith scholars in the history of Islam. And one of the biggest Quran scholars in the history of Islam. Right? All of the, I mean, we can go down a long list to talk about all these. They're almost like they're subhuman. How amazing they were, subhanAllah.
Is there a reason why Hafs is more popular? Is it just the easiest maybe?
It's something Allah is the one who determines that, not any of us. I don't think Hafs is necessarily easier than Shu'bah. If I were to pick an easiest out of all of these, I would say probably Qalun. Out of these, right? Qalun might be the easiest. But there's 6 ways to recite Qalun, so 6. Did I say that right? There's so, 4 ways to recite Qalun. Okay? There's 6 ways to recite Warsh. Now when I say 4, I'm talking about from the way of Shatibi. From the way of Durra, Ibn Jazari rahmatullahi alayh, because Ibn Jazari came after Shatibi, and he wrote more about this. When I say wrote more about it, it wasn't that Imam Shatibi was missing. It's just that Imam Shatibi rahmatullahi alayh picked a small amount or a certain amount to write about. And Imam Jazari rahmatullah came after him, and then he wrote about the rest of them.
Same generation.
Yeah, all the same stuff, he just put all together. And he added 3 more because Imam Shatibi gave 7 qurra, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's Hamza and Kisa'i, that's after this, that I didn't write down. He added 3 more qurra, and so again, this is the oral protection of the Quran. Okay, then we talked about the written protection of the Quran, how they go together but they're separate. They have different paths, but they coincided at the same place. Right? Again, the miracle of the Quran. And Now, when you recite, there's certain things that are in the Quran that you have no way of knowing unless you read it to a sheikh. Like, for example, the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنَّا عَلَى يُوسُف. You're going to see a big, some Qurans they put a big black dot, some Qurans they put a diamond, right? مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنَّا عَلَى يُوسُف. Right? So, the way you read that is with ishmam. You do this. مَا لَكَ لَا تَأْمَنَّا عَلَى يُوسُف. You don't know that from reading it in a book. You learn that from a sheikh. Right? That has come down by the oral transmission. Same thing with tajweed. There were no books written about tajweed until at least 100, 200 years after the Prophet ﷺ. But they all agree on all the different qira'at, they all agree on the basics of tajweed. It's all the same. How? It has to be from Allah. It has to be from Allah. Because, I mean, like, if you think about it, like, I mean, I'm sure somebody could have made something up. Somebody could have did this or did that, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected it. He protected this Quran. So it's protected in many ways. Orally, and with that comes tajweed. There's still the same way it was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. That wasn't protected by the Quran.
Okay. They say they use Quran to guide their, just like a ruler, you know.
So, and I'll tell you about, because Arabic is a part of the way that was protecting the Quran. What happened was, is the Quran was written with no dots and no vowels. Okay? Yeah, I can't read that either. No way. I have to have dots. I can read without vowels, but I need my dots. But they didn't have dots back then. They didn't recite with dots. So there were a lot of people coming into Islam that were not Arabs. And they were reading the Quran and they were reading it wrong. Like somebody, for example, he read Alif Lam Mim ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا زَيْتَ فِيهِ. Zayt is olive, is oil. It has no oil in it. But it's supposed to be that it has no doubt in it. Raib is doubt, right? So Ali radiallahu anhu, he saw what was going on. So he told Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, and this is subhanallah, it shows you that they knew that this is from Allah. He told Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali, go to the Arab tribes and gather and learn about Arabic and write rules about it. He could have easily said, write rules from the Quran. He could have said, take the Quran and write rules from the Quran. No. He told them, take it from Arabic, from the Arabs themselves. Write rules from Arabs. And the Quran is Arabic. Right? It is exactly... It was Ali radiallahu anhu. It was Ali. No, Ali. No, it was later. It was later. After Abu Bakr, after Umar, after Uthman. It was basically completely compiled by Imam Sibawayh rahmatullahi alayhi. Right? Imam Sibawayh, he was Persian, and they call him the father of Arabic. Right? Even though he wasn't Arab, but they call him the father of Arabic. So that's another aspect that protected the Quran as well, is protecting the language. But again, this is an independent process. That process had nothing to do with the Quran, although it's influenced by the Quran, but it's an independent process. And this all shows you where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikr wa inna lahu lahafidhun." How it's just amazing that we're seeing the implementation of that how this was protected. If it was human beings who were controlling this and who were in charge of this, there's no way that this Quran would be like this today. No way. It's impossible. But it was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is controlling every bit of it. So when I hear someone say that, like, there is no, I've heard people say there is no, like, there's no babit, or what is it called in English, like the different modes of recitation. It's just ijtihad, like some scholars just came up with it. That's what I've heard some people say. The different modes of recitation.
So people come up with it.
Yeah, there's these different scholars that came up with it.
How?
No,
Right.
that's the furthest from the truth. They got it from the Prophet ﷺ. Everything fix it, because however you're reading Hafs. You can't say, oh yeah, I want to read it like Warsh a little bit. Because that chain of narration that goes back to Hafs, he learned it like that from his sheikh, that sheikh, all the way up until the Prophet ﷺ. That's exactly how they learned it. So why change it? You can't do that.
Otherwise, there's corruption in the chain then.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. We don't change the Quran. The Quran is exactly the way the Prophet ﷺ taught it. So when he's teaching you like this way, why would you add something else? That's wrong. Right? So to think that, oh yeah, some scholars just, that's assuming that these scholars did not understand that the Prophet ﷺ taught it exactly like this, and they don't want to read it like that. They want to add something else and do. No, of course they didn't do that. Right? They taught it exactly how they were taught it. And up until the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? And then tafsir. Abdullah bin Abbas radiallahu anhu was the most knowledgeable of the companions when it came to tafsir. The Prophet ﷺ called him Tarjaman al-Quran. And Ubay ibn Ka'b, who I also mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ called him Qari al-Sahaba, like he was the reciter of the companions. So Abdullah bin Abbas was the mufassir of the companions. Right? Tarjaman al-Quran means the translator of the Quran. Okay? Abdullah bin Abbas, he said, there was not an ayah in the Quran except that I asked the Prophet ﷺ why it was revealed, what it means, and so on and so forth. So Abdullah bin Abbas, he learned everything he could about the Quran from the Prophet ﷺ, meaning-wise. So therefore, a lot of times when you hear, oh yeah, this ayah is this, and Abdullah bin Abbas said that, know that because the Prophet ﷺ said that. Do you understand? I think that's generally the history behind the compilation of the Quran. I hope that covers a lot up, and then I hope. Are there any questions about that? So the dots were added later on. The vowels were added very recent.
Recent means when, like,
Within 100 years, 100, maybe 200.
what is this?
But the Quran has never been a systematic thing that it has become today. So King Fahd, may Allah have mercy on him, of Saudi Arabia, he started the Mujamma' Fahd, the Quran printing press, right? So a lot of the Qurans that we have today are from there, right? And he distributed around the world. world for free.
So my question, probably about when you mention all this, you know, what about the Shia side? How they
They
believe
have the
that-
same thing.
the same thing that they are mentioning in the
No.
the
No.
okay.
Yeah.
Just just isn't unnecessarily knowledge, I know, but I was just like, okay, how they come up with this kind of Quran, which route they took. That's what my question is.
I would be surprised if you find a Shia who memorized the Quran. There's not that many.
Subhanallah, I did not know that.
Yeah.
They have their own book.
There's the thing about the Shia. There are different levels of Shia. Okay. And they have different beliefs. Some of them have the exact same Quran we have. Some of them have stuff that they've taken out of the Quran. Yeah. I don't think they've added anything. I think they've only taken things out. Allah knows best. But that's as far as I know, that's a minority. The ones that have taken things out. But again, like, and I'm speaking very generally here,
And
that they don't memorize the Quran. Like in the Sunni circles, like this masjid alone, you'll probably find 10 people who memorize the Quran. Right? You go to a Shia masjid, you're most likely not going to find one.
So do they not revere the Quran as much as the Sunnis do, or?
I don't know exactly what it is. I don't know. Again, this deen is from Allah. It's not something that we're, like, Allah is giving it to us.
Yes.
Right? Allah subhanahu the Prophet ﷺ, he said that Allah keeps knowledge by scholars. And then we start to lose it by the loss of scholars. It's the scholars that are keeping, like, Allah is blessing these people with that knowledge. Right? It's not like, oh yeah, this person, 9 times out of 10, this person didn't grow up being groomed to be a scholar. It's just Allah blessed them to go that way. You know what I mean? But there are scholars who were groomed to be that. But there's a lot of people who are being groomed to be a scholar and they don't get it. This is something Allah gives you. Something that Allah gives you. Just like it's not. Right? There's a lot of people you would say, oh man, that guy, he should be Muslim.
yeah, so many of them.
Right?
Their knowledge, their intellect. How come these people?
But you just don't know. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah, especially
Allah knows the unseen. And He guides whom
religious leaders. Now I'm talking about those people are really devoted to their religion and say,
Allah
if
knows.
they see this religion, the Quran itself.
Allah knows.
One thing I really
Because
admire.
you see, let me tell you this one thing.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ, if there is anybody on earth who can guide, it would be him.
Yeah, the uncle. Yeah, that's
Right? That's one. Two is that if there were anyone that Allah would guide because of someone, it would be him.
Good. Yeah, I never thought about that.
Right?
That's true.
But Allah didn't guide his uncle, who he loved dearly.
He's good for Islam.
He didn't guide him. And then Allah said, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتِ. You don't guide who you want. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Allah knows. Allah knows. Yes. So you this is not ours. It's Allah's.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Any other questions?
So, Justin, is this I know you were gonna start from Fatiha. I was thinking, like, you don't have to take it, but just idea for.
Start from the small
way.
surahs?
No, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we'll forgive me, ayah wise, like Allah first, and by tertib, how he was received. I know it's gonna be hard because some ayahs.
Yeah, but that's different.
Yeah.
Let me tell you this. This is the amazingness about this Quran. Unfortunately, we don't have that much time.
Yeah, okay.
They pray at 8, right?
8, yeah, we start.
Okay, so we have to leave here within 5 minutes. All right, so Allah revealed this Quran to the Prophet ﷺ, the way He revealed it for the companions like that. كَذَلِكَ لِنُثَبِّتَ بِهِ فُؤَادَكَ. Right? Like they asked him, why didn't put it all at one time? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, so that it can be firm in your heart. I mean, think about this for a second. There's a difference between you taking a child and then telling him, make salah, and then he prays. And then you sitting him down and having a long conversation with him about the importance of salah, how salah is going to give you Jannah, so on and so forth. And then you say, hey, come, let's make salah. There's a difference between the two. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, you are very subtle.
It looks like
MashaAllah.
It looks like he's winning now from that conversation. Oh yeah, you see,
But I'll give you guys my philosophy about salah, since we're on this topic anyways, and we only got a couple minutes. But my philosophy, and this was the philosophy of the Prophet inshallah, was that the Prophet ﷺ said, you teach them at 7, and then you beat them at 10 for salah. Okay. So there was this one sheikh. He said, if your kid is making salah for 10 years, he said, what is there to beat him for? If they've been making salah for 10 years, would you have to beat them?
No, that is if he's
No.
not, right?
What the Prophet ﷺ is saying here, is that if there's either two cases. One is you messed up on your duty. You didn't teach him. So now you have to teach him. Now, unfortunately, you got to use force. Right? Or, secondly, that he's just a bad child. He's a bad person. And that's the only way he's going to learn. Right? But anyways, my point is that so this is what the Prophet ﷺ said: teach them at 7 and beat them at 10. Right? So to what he said, because that's what he said. What did he do? Is that the small companions were always around salah.
That's what we knew.
So when teach them at 7 means that's when you tell them pray, and that's when you teach them to pray. Before that, you shouldn't be telling them to pray.
You're not forcing them to pray.
Yeah, they're always around it.
Yeah.
They're always there. I remember my son Yusuf, who's now 15. 15? Yeah, something like that. When he was a little kid, right? He was about this guy's age.
You got
Right?
it, man.
And I was leaving the house, okay? And he was crying. But before I left, I had to make salah. So I was upstairs getting ready, and he noticed, because I'm getting ready, he's like, okay, I need to start crying now. So he started crying because he wanted to go with me. So he's crying, going crazy, crying. So I'm just ignoring him, right? So I'm getting ready and everything, and I go downstairs, and then I start praying. So I can hear him as I'm praying, coming down the stairs, like almost dragging himself down, crying, right? The whole time, crying. So I'm praying, and he comes right next to me, and he starts praying while he's crying. And he's like screaming in ruku', screaming, and I'm about to start laughing. 'Cause it's like,
So what? Why we are not going? That's a cries or?
yeah, he doesn't want to go. He wants to go with me,
Yeah.
but because he knows I'm getting ready, and he's not getting ready.
He knows.
So he knows he knows I'm leaving.
He knows everything. Like even I'm preparing make wudu, he start bringing his shoes. And
So
clothes,
this is the environment you want them to grow up in.
Alhamdulillah, yeah.
So when they grow up in this environment,
You know,
and they're always praying, like also even babies when you pray, so you keep them with you in that environment as much as possible. And then now when they get to 7, you say, hey, come pray, they're already doing it.
That's right.
That's how we grew up. Yeah.
And then so now when you start to teach them, they're like, oh, that's how I do that. Okay, that makes sense. Oh yeah, okay. And now they're starting to connect the dots because they've already been practicing it. So now by the time they're 10, it's just like, it's life. This is just what we do. You know what I'm saying? And then now at that time at 10 or even before that, when they start to understand, that's when you start to talk to them about the importance of it, when they're understanding it.
Yeah. Rationale.
The rationale behind it, so on and so forth. And then there's the struggle after 10 when they're teenagers. Then there's there's another struggle because they're being lazy. It's not because they don't want to pray. It's just there's the lazy aspect of it.
Time, school, or that
Yeah.
kind of matters.
So there's different ways to fight through that. But anyways, let's leave it at that. Inshallah. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
I appreciate that.